What is going on, everybody? Hope everyone is doing well. My name is Jason, and in today's video, we're going to be doing a preview of the 110th Grey Cup between the Montreal Alouettes and the Winnipeg Blue Bombers from Tim Hortons Field in Hamilton. We're going to go over the quarterback matchup, the team stats, and some of the key matchups that I think can decide this game. But quickly before we get started, I just wanted to say that we're going to be doing a live show with the Markcast and Evan Wilsmore on Saturday from the Hamilton Convention Center, the Lions Den section there in the team party headquarters from 3 to 5 Eastern on Saturday before the Grey Cup. So be sure to join us on YouTube, on the Markcast YouTube channel, as well as in person if you are around the area that day. Come and say hi. But with that said, let's get started with today's video. So certainly a pretty surprising Grey Cup matchup this year, with Winnipeg not necessarily being a surprise, making it out of the West for the 4th straight season, but Montreal making their first appearance in the big game since 2010 when they had Anthony Calvillo at quarterback and they won back-to-back Grey Cups. So very excited for the fans in Montreal to take in the big game once again. But with that said, let's get started with today's preview. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers and Montreal Alouettes met twice during the regular season, Winnipeg winning both meetings. The first was in Week 4 on Canada Day, where Winnipeg went in a game that was delayed by the weather there in Montreal. Winnipeg eventually won the game 17-3, a very sloppy affair. Cody Fardo had a couple of bad turnovers in the red zone in that one that made it a lot more lopsided than it actually was throughout the course of that game, but ultimately Winnipeg wins it. And then the second matchup was in Week 12, where Winnipeg won convincingly 47-17. I just remember Montreal's offense didn't really do much at all in that game. The defense really kept them in it throughout the first half, but then Winnipeg really pulled away in the second half. So I think at the end of the day, Montreal's offense didn't really fare too well in those first two matchups during the regular season against that Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense. And I thought that Montreal's defense actually did a pretty decent job throughout both of those matchups against Winnipeg's offense. So I think that both defenses have proved their competency against each other throughout the two matchups this season. But we'll have to see how it plays out in the Grey Cup on Sunday. But Winnipeg did win both of the matchups during the regular season. Now, in terms of the quarterback matchup in this one, let's start with Zach Collaros, who played in 16 games this season, passed for 4,263 passing yards, 33 touchdown passes, 15 interceptions, while completing 69% of his throws. Simply an MOP caliber season once again for Zach Collaros. Unfortunately, did not get the nod for his own team. That would be Brady Oliveira, his running back, who had an outstanding season. So there's no shame in that. But Collaros, another excellent season, leading the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to the Grey Cup once again. And fun fact, as I said in my previous video this week talking about CFL dynasties, Zach Collaros is actually going to become the first quarterback in CFL history to start 4 consecutive Grey Cups, which I thought was pretty cool. Now, in terms of the other side of the equation, Cody Fardo, 16 games played this year, 3,847 passing yards, 14 touchdowns versus 12 interceptions, completing 71% of his throws. A pretty solid season overall for Fajardo. Obviously, you see the touchdown numbers are less than half of what Zach Collaros was able to put up this year, but Montreal, very different style of offense. They like to limit mistakes and kind of keep control of the ball and kind of pick their spots of when they want to score. So that's kind of factors into why Fajardo's numbers are a lot lower than Zach Collaros this season, but I think Fajardo's overall had a very strong season, and as I've said before, this whole quarterback situation could have ended up much worse for the Alouettes after the departure of Trevor Harris during the offseason. So props to Cody Fardo for having a great season and getting them back to the Grey Cup for the first time since 2010. Now, looking over on the other side of the board with the team stats. So as always, the stats that we're looking at: points for, points against, passing offense, rushing offense, passing defense, and rushing defense. So, again, there's a lot of different stats you can look at. I probably should have put turnover differential because that's been a very key stat in Montreal season this year, but just couldn't find room on the board to put it up there. But that's one thing that Montreal really thrives off of this season. So, starting at the top of the board, we have points for, and Winnipeg has a big edge here 33 points per game, which was first in the CFL this season. Simply a great year for their offense. And then Montreal, on the other hand, 24.6 points per game, which is fourth in the CFL this season. So quite a gap between those two teams in terms of how many points they're scoring per game. About 8 more points per game this year for Winnipeg. Now, in terms of points against, I think this is the most interesting stat on the board here. These are the top 2 ranked scoring defenses in the CFL this season. Winnipeg leads the way with 20.9 points per game, which is first in the CFL this season. Once again, that defense kind of turned back the clock throughout the season and really was that dominant unit that we've been used to seeing over the last 4 years or so. And then for Montreal, they have kind of become the major story of this team this year, allowing only 21.8 points per game this season and have been kind of the catalyst of this playoff run that they've been going on this season. Now, in terms of passing offense, Winnipeg has the edge here, 278.2 passing yards per game, which is second in the CFL this season. Once again, Zach Collaros is having a really strong season. They have a lot of great receivers in Winnipeg, and it'll be interesting to see how they match up against that Montreal defense. And then for Montreal, they're sixth in the CFL in passing yards per game, 228.7 yards per game through the air for them. So, like I said, Winnipeg a much more explosive offense than Montreal. Montreal doesn't like to really push the ball downfield as much as Winnipeg does, so that's something to look out for in this game. Now, in terms of rushing offense, Winnipeg has a big edge here, 139.1 yards per game on the ground, which is first in the CFL, once again led by Brady Oliveira. Good offensive line up front for Winnipeg, leading the way there. Now, in terms of Montreal, 103.4 yards per game on the ground, which is fifth in the CFL. Just a really solid ground game. They have multiple different running backs that they can use, and William Stanback has had a lot of his better games this season down the stretch here, especially into the playoffs. Really good game against Hamilton in the semifinals, and he had some good runs against Toronto last week. So I think at the end of the day, the running game could play a major role in deciding who wins this game, and especially for Montreal, if they can get a really good game out of William Stanback, I think it would really help them and take pressure off Cody Fardo in this matchup. Now, in terms of passing defense, Winnipeg has the edge here, 210.2 yards per game through the air allowed, which is first in the CFL this season. And then Montreal, on the other hand, is second in the CFL in terms of passing defense, 223.5 yards allowed per game through the air for them. So, once again, the top 2 defenses in that respective category. And then finally, in terms of rushing defense, you have Winnipeg leading the way there, 88.8 yards allowed per game on the ground, which is third in the CFL this season. And then for Montreal, 110.4 yards allowed on the ground this season, which is fifth in the CFL this year. So right around league average for Montreal. So at the end of the day, Winnipeg actually leads all of those statistical categories that I just went through, but all of the defensive categories are, first and second are, very close together. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see which defense plays well in this game. Now, in terms of the specific matchups I'm watching for in this one, Zach Collaros versus those Montreal defensive backs. I think that, like I said, they have a lot of depth back there, but also a lot of playmakers back there in the secondary for Montreal. I'm interested to see how Zach Collaros kind of navigates and attacks that secondary if he can find a weak link back there. I think it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, they have an outstanding safety in Marc-Antoine Dequoy. He had that game-changing play against Toronto on the opening drive last week with the pick 6. But you have others as well. Reggie Stubblefield, a guy, rookie that's really impressed me for the Alouettes this season. So they have a lot of playmakers back there in the secondary. It'll be interesting to see if Zach Collaros can have a big game against those guys who are playing really hot right now for Montreal. Now, the second matchup I'm watching here is the Winnipeg offensive line versus the Montreal front 7 on defense. I think that this is kind of strength versus strength. Both units playing very, very well right now. BC's defensive line just could not keep up against that Winnipeg offensive line last week in the West Final. I think that was a big reason why they won that game, and I think that has been a big reason why Winnipeg's been able to go on this continual run of dominance throughout the CFL the last 3 years or so. So I'm really excited to see how Winnipeg's offensive line holds up against that Montreal front 7, who are playing outstanding right now. Obviously, I've talked about Sean Lemon and Darnell Sankey, but I think they have others that they rotate in there on the defensive line. Really good defensive tackle combo with Armando Sewell and Mustafa Johnson in the interior there. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a big test for the Winnipeg offensive line. And if Montreal's front seven can generate the pressure that they've done the last couple of weeks against Toronto and Hamilton, I think they have a shot to win on Sunday. And then the final thing, and I think this is the biggest storyline going into this week, the biggest matchup I think going into this week is the turnover differential. I think that if Montreal can generate the turnovers that they did against Toronto and Hamilton, they definitely have a shot to win this game, because what Montreal has shown throughout this season is if they can get, a pick six or a kick return touchdown or something like that, and, force the offenses that they're playing against to make mistakes, they have a chance to beat anybody in the CFL. Obviously, they did not beat Winnipeg during the regular season, so it'll be interesting to see if they can beat them the third time around, but I think it's going to be a really interesting game. Obviously, a very unorthodox matchup, like I was saying in the intro, but I am excited for it nonetheless, and I think the final thing I wanted to talk about are just some key guys that may be out for either team. I think that Winnipeg, Dalton Schoen, and Nick Dembski are two guys that are kind of appearing on the injury report. Dalton Schoen, of course, did not play last week for Winnipeg. And then, of course, you have Adam Bighill, who left the game against the BC Lions. So he may or may not play. He got on the plane to come to Hamilton, but it'll be interesting to see if he plays on Sunday against the Alouettes. But I think in terms of the Alouette side of things, I haven't heard of any really major injuries for them. I think they're relatively healthy going into this matchup, so that definitely could favor them come Sunday. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be an interesting game, and in terms of my pick for this one, I'm going to go with Winnipeg to win this game, just because I picked them to win the Grey Cup at the beginning of the playoffs here. So if you want to hear more of my reasoning for that, be sure to go check out that video. But at the end of the day, I hope you guys enjoy the Grey Cup this weekend. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.